Like all technology, there comes a time when buying the alternative no longer makes any sense. The internal combustion engine over horse and cart, smartphones over the old Nokia and Motorola phones, LCD TVs over huge CRTs. Unless you have no other option at all, e.g. you need to tow a 2.5-ton caravan or boat and can't wait a couple of years for an EV which can tow that much, then you'll be wasting a shit ton of money if you buy an ICE car right now. EVs are getting cheaper and will reach price parity within 1 to 2 years, mainly due to declining battery costs. ICE is much more expensive to run, fuel, maintenance. Most ICE manufacturers are transitioning from ICE to EV, mostly forced to by strict emission standards and ICE bans in most markets over the next 10 to 15 years. Fuel costs will continue to rise as oil investment continues to fall and oil reserves continue to fall. And also demand falls in most markets as the customer base becomes smaller. Some developing countries, e.g. India, will have increased demand for fuel as more people begin to afford the car, but as EVs hit price parity with even the cheapest ICE cars, fuel demand will fall sharply even in those countries. Due to those factors, many buyers are holding off on buying a car while they wait for an EV they can afford. Therefore, second-hand ICE values will plummet over the next 2 years, leaving owners severely out of pocket when or if they can sell their current ICE car. If you keep your ICE car too long, it will be an expensive to run, stranded asset worth next to nothing, while at the same time costing you a fortune in fuel and maintenance and repairs. Let's talk about the Osborne Effect. So, the Osborne Effect is when customers hold off buying the old stuff as they know the newer and better stuff is coming. Osborne Computers was a UK company in the early 80s who created a kick-ass computer, the Osborne 1. Sexy name. While that computer was selling really well, they started marketing their next computers, which would be much more powerful and not much more expensive. So, customers stopped buying the Osborne 1 while they waited a year for the new Osborne Executive, which is a better name than the Osborne 1, and the Osborne Vixen, which is a much sexier name. But because Osborne needed the profits from the Osborne 1 to manufacture the Osborne Executive and Vixen, the company went bankrupt. If you're old enough, you may remember, or even have had, a Nokia or Motorola or similar phone in the 90s. Nokia and Motorola were the kings of mobile phones and making massive profits. No one could come close. Remember those phones where you had physical buttons for texting and had to press the same button however many times to cycle through to the character you needed? Good times! And then, some little company called Apple started announcing something crazy about a smartphone, using fingers to do stuff on a big glass screen. Impossible! Sorcery! But then Apple showed some demos, and then reporters tried it out, and you know the rest. Nokia, Motorola, etc. sales died in the ass, while users waited to buy an Apple iPhone, instead of replacing their previously much-loved Nokia or cell phone. Much like when horses and carts weren't replaced while they waited for decent cars and trucks, or why Kodak film died in the arse when digital cameras came out, or the CRT market died when digital TVs came along. The exact same thing is happening right now with the transition to EVs. People are hanging on to their old bangers as long as possible while they wait for the really affordable EVs. How much was your Nokia, Motorola, CRT TV and film camera worth when those transitions happened? 2022-23 are the years that ICE cars die, as even more affordable EVs come out from China, e.g. the Aura Cat and the BYD EA1. Both of those will be about $25,000 US or less each. Here are the current timeframes for the phasing out of new ICE sales around the world. You can see in this map that London bans all ICE cars from the city in 2025. Norway will not have any new ICE sales at all from 2025. Many other cities and countries, including the UK and much of Europe, are banning new ICE sales from 2030. By 2035 and 2040, France, Spain, Canada, most large American cities and more will have banned ICE sales, I predict it'll actually be sooner as the momentum takes over. As this includes most of the major markets, this means all the manufacturers will have no choice but to transition their products to EV so they can still sell in those markets. There is no going back. So what about the costs of an ICE versus EV? As manufacturing of EVs scale up and the technology becomes better, the costs of EVs and their batteries are coming down. Lithium-ion battery prices, which were above $1,200 per kilowatt in 2010, have fallen 89% to $132 per kilowatt hour in November 2021. For electric buses, they are already $100 US per kilowatt hour. Other battery chemistries such as lithium iron, IRON, are already cheaper and will become even cheaper as iron is plentiful. Many other batteries are being developed which may be even cheaper to produce. EV sales in the top 8 markets worldwide were just 2.2% in the first half of 2018. In the second half of 2021, they were forecast to be 12.7%. Out of all the cars sold in the 8 major markets in 2021, over 12% have been electric. China accounts for 51% of the market, followed by Europe with 24% and USA with 10%. EV prices have generally not increased much over the past year as automakers focused on building EV market share for the future, but ICE prices have increased by over 20%. So the price differential has fallen by 1/3, and UBS expect price parity by 2024 as EV costs continue to fall. I personally think it will be mid to late 2022 or early to mid 2023 as the Chinese EVs are exported worldwide and factories start being built in each continent. BYD, NIO, Aura, XPeng will be the frontrunners. This will hasten the demise of GM, Honda and others, while forcing Ford, VW, Toyota and some others to either get Chinese companies to build EVs on their behalf, as Toyota is already starting to do with BYD, or to merge and shrink as they fight to build EV factories and retool at the same time as their ICE sales are falling into an abyss. Big legacy auto is going to have an extremely difficult time transitioning to EV and still being solvent. US government data shows that EV running costs are already 40% lower than ICE at 0.061 cents per mile versus 0.101 cents per mile. For most countries, an EV costs 1/3 in electricity than an ICE does in fuel. This gap will only widen, and that 1/3 in electricity is at the most expensive home rates, not even factoring in that most people will recharge their car via their solar, which is basically free. EV's acceleration up the S-curve mirrors the position for all major new developments. Just 122 million smartphones were sold in 2007, and cell phones were still the dominant product in mobile telephony. 10 years later, 1.5 billion smartphones were being sold, and cell phones had largely disappeared from the market. The same is going to happen with EVs, as consumers abandon ICE in the same way as they abandon cell phones. And it is also good news for net zero targets, as transport is around 60% of total oil demand. Right, let's run some numbers. The average cost of a new sedan in Australia is $44,557. So here's a quick comparison of buying a new ICE sedan versus an EV sedan. So the ICE, $44,557. The EV, Model 3, which is around $66,000. The ICE car costs $2,750 in fuel and service maintenance each year, whereas the Model 3 costs $468 at the most if you charge it overnight on the most expensive electricity rate. Most people will be charging it for free, as I mentioned, from the solar on the weekend. But let's assume you never charge it for free. Over 10 years, that ICE car will have cost you $22,829 Australian dollars more in fuel and servicing than the Model 3. And that's without any major parts or repairs being done to their engine. The break-even point, even for an EV costing $21,443 more than the ICE, the equivalent ICE, and paying for all your charging from home, is 9.4 years. Don't forget that you can actually sell your current car or trade it in with Tesla, and the changeover cost of ICE to a Model 3 is even less. If you use the Tesla 1.99% finance rate, it's even cheaper than buying an ICE on a higher interest rate. If, for argument's sake, an ICE and an EV were the same price, $35,000, you'd be saving $1,890 per year by buying an EV. That's $18,900 over 10 years without any major repairs of the ICE. But get this, BYD are planning to release the EA1, or whatever that's going to be called when it gets here to Australia, in 2022, this year, for 35,000 Australian dollars. Let me repeat that. $35,000 for an electric car with about 500 kilometers of range and 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in less than 5 seconds. If you want to compare that to a Mazda 2, similar type of car, which is an ICE, is $24,490, the yearly saving of the EA1 would be $1,500 per year. $15,000 over 10 years. It would take 3.7 years to break even, with the EA1 costing $5,510 more. If you really need a new or second-hand car right now, personally, I would not pay more than $10,000 at the most. There are many decent second-hand cars for even $5,000. For example, the Nissan Tiida. Boring to look at, but reliable. You just need to get one to last as many years as you need in order to afford a new or second-hand EV. Unless there is a specific and desperate need, anyone who spends more than $10,000 on a typical ICE car from now on is just wasting their money. Within a year, you'll be able to buy an EV for less than 35,000 Australian dollars. It won't be Tesla quality, sure, but it will be pretty damn good and with a decent range. Thanks for watching.